start with you, Ivor, a sort of radio guru who works in production for Church Radio in Brent.
Yeah.
Is that right? So firstly, I suppose what I want to know is, during this election and going forward, whoever comes into power, what are your big concerns for London? What would you like to see change?
For London in particular, I think there's going to have to be a lot of change. There's a lot of things that are not working. There's a lot of concerns for people when it comes to food banks, when it comes to finding a job, housing, etc. You know, mine, I suppose, is looking at how we can have some, not just equality, but justice, because a lot of things are happening on the street at the moment, and people don't feel that there's any justice out there. They don't feel that their lives are getting better. So my concern is, having all of this been hyped up and all the stuff in regards to the polls and the landslide victory, that, you know, maybe a year or two down the line, nothing has changed. I think people want to see change. People are hoping for change.
That is one of the big concerns, isn't it, Daniel? Because a lot of the polls are saying, and people like Reform, who are doing really well in the polls, seems to indicate that a lot of people, even when it comes to the big two parties, Conservatism and Labour, even though, as Ivor says, it looks like a potential landslide if you're going to believe the polls, that still both parties, there seems to be some real lack of, you know, identification with big mainstream leaders nowadays, and there seems to be a lot of people out there going, either way, I don't think a lot's going to change. How do you feel about it?
Listen, London, in my opinion, is the greatest city in the world, but there needs to be a lot of change in order for us to actually maximise that potential. And I feel as though with these two parties, Conservative and Labour, a lot of people are feeling disassociated, but also let down because they have not seen that change that they want, whether it's education, whether it's crime, in all aspects of our city. So I think what needs to happen now is for both parties to target everyone in the capital, the youth, but also perhaps you know, older people, and also look at what they want, look at their needs, because no two needs in this city are the same, and to actually reach out to people on a personal level, and only then can we address the issues in our city through politics.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that. I mean, Daniel, you're a student currently, 18 years old, spoken for one. Naomi, also currently a student at university from Greenwich. Tell us a little bit about how you feel about that, because when we were speaking, you said your key concerns are around education, and you worry that potentially there's no party, because you're currently undecided, that might be able to address some of the big problems that we face in the education sector.
Yeah, I think it's really important that the government analyse the target audience and the youth, that they focus on what we really want. I think the education system really needs to be reformed, whether we're focusing on, you know, curriculum or equity within the system. I mean, studies show that 1/3 of students in further education, or well, doing their GCSEs, they leave school without maths and English qualifications. And I mean, that's detrimental. That stops them from achieving so many opportunities and, you know, getting these jobs. And I mean, we can link that to the unemployment that's happening in the city. So, I mean, I think it's really important that the government address that.
Steve, a teacher from Tower Hamlets, but you work at a school in Mottingham. You must have some strong opinions on this, particularly when it comes to the education sector and how you'd like to see it addressed, because, as I say, there is a crisis. There's multiple crises, a housing crisis, all these things, and we'll get onto all that. But how do you feel about what Naomi just said?
I think you're absolutely right, Naomi. It's that there has to be a kind of reform up. I think the Labour Party, who I think have got lots and lots of good ideas, and I think there's a really good, genuine appetite for change. And I know Keir Starmer is not necessarily the most popular, but I think his team that he's surrounded with, they're all very, very talented, way more than the rather shallow talent pool that's in the Conservative Party at the moment. But there is one policy that I think is not a great idea, and I'll fess up that this affects me as well, so it's not just for everybody else, but the idea of kind of taxing the private schools in order to fund the state schools. Now, I get that the headline of that is a great idea, and I understand as a socialist idea why should private schools not be taxed like that. But I think that's going to drive a massive great wedge between those that are privately educated, the ones that will be able to afford that, and the people that now can't afford that. I think it's not fair to say that everybody that's at private schools is just like swimming in cash. Yeah. I teach at 3 private schools, and I have taught in the state sector as well, and that simply isn't the case. So I think that idea that it will suddenly generate 1.5 billion and we'll find 6,000 more teachers, I don't think that's work. I think Naomi is absolutely correct that you need to rebuild it from the bottom and just work out what's not working here.
It does seem like a bit of a mad idea, particularly given the fact that estimates that the VAT on private schools won't make nearly enough money to cover any sort of issues in the state sector.
Yeah.
And it seems like one of those policies that's a bit of the politics of envy rather than doing anything genuinely meaningful to help cure the current debt problems we have across all the public sector.
Yeah.
And on that sort of basis, when you look at Labour's manifesto and you look at how they're addressing tax, and they say sort of vague notions like putting wealth and wealth creation at the heart of what they're trying to do, there doesn't seem to be a lot of great detail on a lot of all those things. And it doesn't seem like there's any really solid ideas. There's no, as Keir Starmer said himself, rabbit out the hat moments in his manifesto launch that seem to say this is what we're going to do that might really affect your lives. They're not going to raise income tax. They say they're not going to raise national insurance, but there might be other taxes lurking that all seems rather vague. To be fair, the IFS said today, the Tory party also, their tax plans seem quite vague as well. Where do you stand on all that, Ivor? Are we still going to end up paying more and more and more because there's no real party that can make a difference?
Well, I think people are going to pay more in certain aspects, but I think, as you mentioned about Keir Starmer and the rabbit out of the hat, I heard her saying that if you bring a rabbit out of the hat, it can get trapped. And he doesn't want to get trapped in any way, shape or form in the future by saying he doesn't want to do this, but then this happens. You know, I read somewhere where I think the UK makes over two and a bit trillion, but in taxes, but about 2.7 trillion in debt. So you've got to address something somewhere. And taxes will come up, I believe, but it's where he puts those. And he's been very careful. There's a lot of the pies have been careful, apart from the Green Pie, to be fair, where they say we're going to raise taxes for this. And they've been very clear and bold in what they want to do. But for the Labour Party, it's that kind of Ming vase. We're just walking it gently towards the number 10 door, and then we can then get through and do what we have to do. So I understand that vagueness of what they're doing. It's just trying to play safe and not give everything away.
How do you feel about that, Daniel? The Conservatives are saying they want to cut national insurance again by 2 percentage points, which, when you leave university and you start earning a paycheck, that might really impact you. Labour won't be doing that. Reform and other parties like that are some more drastic measures if they were to get in, but that is again unlikely. Where do you stand on all this in terms of the amount of money that you'll be paying as a young Londoner off the back of an election, because the party that comes into power might likely be there for potentially 2 terms?
I mean, I think in the cost of living crisis, where a lot of people are worried about their finances, the parties are obviously going to be targeting taxes and say how they're going to be reducing it. But in my personal opinion, I'd rather have taxes increase, but at least see that go into public services, than have empty promises about them going down, have them actually frozen, and still have the same inadequate services, such as whether it's healthcare, having to wait 12 hours for a doctor, or education, where there are a lack of teaching staff for many of the key areas. So I think if both parties are saying that they are going to be reducing tax, which inevitably will have to go up at some point in the future, it's about how much, how soon, and also where those taxes are going to be going, because obviously there needs to be change and there needs to be funding for that change, but that funding for that change can actually come through tax, and so the government in power actually has to think about how they're going to best use that tax for that change.
How do you feel about that, Naomi?
I mean, Daniel pretty much summed it up really well. We want to see where the tax is going, and we want to actually see the results. Saying something is one thing, but actually doing it and having positive results is another. And that is what we as young people want to see.
Steve, your take on the whole tax issue?
I think taxes, obviously they're a kind of red flag to anybody in an election situation. And I understand that the manifestos have got to be pretty vague, because nobody can predict what the tax burden is going to be in 4 years, 3 years, even 2 years, really. So at best, they can only say what we'll do immediately as we get in, and then they're going to do a budget in no time at all, and everything's out the window anyway. So I think it's one of those things that they just have to be super, super careful, that they can't be taken to task straight afterwards and got to say stuff that doesn't put people off. So to be honest, I just take the whole tax thing with a pinch of salt, because it's going to change. Nobody can predict.